once said in the sociology of knowledge that modern science is about the communism of knowledge. Knowledge should be easily communicated. So if you have a social science where concepts are culturally specific, then that's not social science. Then I cannot communicate with other people. And in my view, the social sciences really, interweave with one another. There's a lot of cross-fertilization in social sciences. For example, in political science today, a whole lot of it today is not what it used to be 40 years ago. Today, a lot of political science is really political sociology. And, that's the way it is. There's theory at one end, and that theory also is imbrued with sociology and sociological problems. That is to say, how do people relate to one another? How are they sharing conjoint experiences? And if you look at John Rawls, for example, I think John Rawls is a very good instance of this aspect I'm talking about, which is namely intersubjectivity. It is not easy, and Rawls is saying, try and make it work in a social contract fashion. So I feel that state and society are together, and let's not see them separately. They should be seen as one. In fact, one is playing off against the other. In some ways, I might even say the state, democracy, modernity are different sides of the same coin. It's the same thing seen from different angles. And they're not, in that sense, discrete entities. If you once make them discrete, then I think the vibrancy of each of them is somewhat sacrificed.
Can I just add to my question? One is that kind of conceptual level, and as an abstract category, one can talk about state in a very universal sense of the term. But as sociologists have in some sense struggled with it and engaged with it and written on this, that when question of modernity comes, its realization happens within the nation-state framework. And the nation-state framework also then brings in question of democracy and then whole question of methodological nationalism. How does one kind of think of society as a conceptual category and the reality of this geographically bounded, historically produced, in terms of development being very different, nation-state contexts, and that in some sense.
Yeah, good you raised that question. Now, the thing really is this, that how nation-states came into being primarily in let's say Western Europe. They came into being by overcoming absolutism, monarchy, and so forth. That's how nation-states came into being. And that is why in Western Europe, there's a lot of emphasis on individual liberties and things like that. Unlike colonial countries which broke away and became nation-states. Now, nation-states are not democratic states. If you look at nation-states, in most nation-states, say in the post-colonial world, a large number of democratic states, nation-states, didn't succeed in being democracies. In many other parts of the world, perhaps they did. In India, I think we are rather fortunate because our country worked towards being a democracy even before India became independent. If you look at the various resolutions of the Congress Party over the years. So in India, in fact, when independence happened, if you look at Nehru's speech, you will get to see that he's actually saying that there is something more to be done. This is just the beginning. And what was something more to be done is the republic had to be inaugurated. That is, the nation-state had to move on to becoming a democracy. Nation-states by themselves can be very repressive, actually, which is why to talk in terms of state and nation-state as one is okay, but the moment you bring in democracy and modernity, it is necessary for us to make that very different, very important qualitative jump from nation-state to democratic state. And these two are not the same. They're very different, though they often, in some cases, pretend to be one. You have so many countries which are brutal dictatorships, but they'll call themselves, republic of this or republic of that, people's something or the other. But that's only in name. In reality, they're not that at all. Had it been so, then what the wise person said about democracy not being easy would have been false. Democracy is not easy because of these reasons.
Okay. Yeah.
My question is to Professor Gupta. Get the mic.
Speak in the mic.
With the mic, can you pass the mic?
May I just add something more to what Surinder asked? Just one or two lines. No, not one or two, but three or four. That is this.
Put it all together. Okay.
That is this, that, why is it that like he asked the witnesses, that you do something, the moment you do that, something else happens. The moment you do that, something else happens. It's a never-ending quest, one after the other. And this Fichte dialectic is endless. But that is what propels human beings to act the way they do. And in my view, this dialectic is best expressed in sociology, in society, in contemporary social science.
Myself, Vikas, I am a student of JNU, Center for Political Studies. My question is with regard to, as you discussed that the modernity and democracy is about intersubjectivity and putting oneself in another shoes. So, Rudolph argues in modernity activation that कि किस तरीके से कास्ट मतलब नागर कास्ट और जो कास्ट होते हैं मॉडर्निटी के बाय प्रोडक्ट की वजह से they were able to assert themselves और एक तरीके से उनका मतलब मॉडर्निटी जिस हिसाब से कास्ट पे वर्क किया है तो it has been led to the creation of the identity as well और अभी के समय हम एक तरीके से देखते हैं कि एक मतलब communal religious based identity का भी जो एक creation हुआ अभी के समय that is also impact of the modernity as well. So how do you put in the intersubjectivity debate because it is not putting oneself in another source?
Yeah.
Okay. Hold on.
The other mic.
Carry on.
Okay. I have two questions. One, you said that democracy is not about what you can do, but basically about what you cannot do. Then you brought in the example of snobbery as well. I was just thinking, because I've been reading Judith Clark. So Clark's point on this point that she brings in liberalism of fear is similar as well. That she says what liberalism has been doing is, and then the normative tradition has been doing is focusing too much on hope, and that's why she calls
On what?
On hope, on positive liberty, on what good things we can do, but not it does not focuses on what we must absolutely avoid, cruelty, snobbery, things like that, misanthropy. So I was just thinking, but bringing that, Clark also says that what is missing in the whole liberal tradition, in her formulation of liberalism of fear, is that liberalism does not have a historical memory, and that's why it misses on those points. But you suggest that history has no role to play in contemporary society. So how to what is your take on that?
We'll collect questions. Yes, please.
One minute.
Second, there's a second question.
1 minute, write this down.
We'll remind you of it.
Okay. The second question is more on something that you touched upon towards the end, with regards to methodology. I mean, your own work has been, you're constantly juggling between what we call the interpretative and the empirical. You've been somehow been able to, in a very good manner, bring in both the worlds, best of the both worlds. So what should, as social scientists today, when there is so much of data available and empirical data from government and otherwise available, what should be our overview or our take on data?
Let me answer this very quickly.
All right, there are about 5 more questions.
I'll answer this because he raised an issue which very quickly I'll answer. First is that, one of the things that modernity has done in caste, for example, is that modernity has loosened the caste system, right? Which is not possible earlier. And therefore, you don't have the caste system today as vibrant as you have caste identities. Caste identities have now become much more vibrant and operative than the caste system, which is why you have caste politics, for example. And caste politics is an example of caste in democracy and how that is helping. Sometimes it works against the idea of democracy, but in more ways than one, it is much better than what the caste system was all about. The second thing is that liberalism, no history is probably a pretty harsh thing to say, but yes, I do believe that because we have a shallow history, we are the better for it. But the reason simply is that we don't have a backlog to carry with us. And when you talk about quantitative and qualitative, I'll give you my take on this. You see, I believe that quantitative is very good, numbers are very good, and sometimes one needs those numbers for regression analysis, so forth. But one should not become a victim of that. In other words, as I mentioned to you, let's have an academic program, and then, so, two examples. I looked at the census, and I found that there were so many agricultural laborers in Western UP. I happen to know West UP quite well, and I know for a fact it's not true, because West UP doesn't have so many agricultural laborers. It has many more small farmers. So I contested that view, and I and two other friends of mine, both were my students once, our colleagues. The one poor man, COVID took him away. But three of us, we went from door to door in 3 villages, and we found that our data and the census data was a huge variation of 44 to 45%. It was that bad, So why was that useful for me? Because that was useful for me because I could now use that census data to show what is really happening with much greater stridency and salience than I could have earlier. Or take the National Sample Survey. It defines the farmer. It defines the farmer as one who works on his land, her land, somebody else's land, whatever, during the past 365 days. What does it mean? That person could work for 2 hours in 365 days, 5 hours, 1 day, 5 days. It is not for 365 days, but during. It makes life easier for the enumerator, but is totally misleading when it comes to social science. So my view is, do your data collection first, and then look at government data, see if they work together. If they don't work together, prefer your data over theirs, and see what is the reason for this difference, and you'll be adding much more to social science. In fact, that is the best way, in my view, for quantitative and qualitative methodology to go together.
Okay, we are going to collect questions. I think most of you will have an opportunity to come back and ask many of these questions in the following sessions. But okay, so you will not get the time just now. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Ratheesh Kumar. When I joined in 2004 as an MA student, your lecture was very hard to understand, and it is still very hard to understand. Sir, you had said that most of the social...
I'll just tell you one thing. Professor Jeet Oberoi, who has passed away, he wrote a book called The Other Mind of Europe. And I read the book. It's very, very difficult. So when he asked me, how did you like the book? I said it was a torture reading it. So he said, I'm very happy because it was a torture writing, so it should be a torture for you reading.
And sir, your lecture was remind us your very famous book, Mistaken Modernity. Sir, you have started your lecture with that no social science possible before democracy. Now, sir, I have a very simple question, that in some undemocratic society or even the dictatorship society, people were hesitating against their oppression and in the support of their various rights. So my question is that, is it not a social science from their perspective that they are resisting their exploitation, they are raising their voice, and sometimes their voices were even heard, or sometimes the government was also compromising?
Okay. Yeah, please. Somebody raised. Yeah, please. Just speak loudly because we have very little time. I'm going to wind up in the next 7 minutes.
So my question also, overlaps with what Supriya asked. You are in your previous speak in the colloquium as well. You mentioned how you have a critique of philosophy as not much of a contributor to knowledge. Should I
Just speak loudly.
So
yes,
my question is, without the normative, the intersubjectivity that you're talking about also wouldn't exist. The source of empathy is also the normative. Thank you so much.
Is it working? So my question is,
All right.
your suggestion of a shallow history would not, hold much ground, because the normative also is historically produced and reproduced, and without the normative, without the what should be, there is no what is. And sociology would be the more poorer of it,
All right.
because we don't have that. So how do you see intersubjectivity without the presence of the normativity, which is historically constructed?
There were 2 other questions. Somebody raised hands here. Anyone else? Am I missing out? Okay.
Yeah. In the past, of course, there were rebellions, there were revolutions even, there was the famous Jacquerie movements in peasant societies where they objected to landlord terror. The famous rick burning in England, the Spartacus movement even before that. But these movements were not democratic movements. They were not democratic movements. They were movements of rebellion. Nation state doesn't mean democracy. Rebellion doesn't mean democracy either. Rebellions have happened throughout history. I mean, for example, how did the Rajput kingdom come about? It was a rebellion. The Gujara Pratyara kingdom, rebellion. How did the Jats come about? Rebellion. But that didn't bring democracy. So rebellion and democracy are not the same thing. That's the most important point. And therefore, to object to those who fought dictatorships or absolutism in their own way did not always mean that they are going to bring in democracy. This didn't happen even in Europe in the mid-19th century. They fought and they got nation state, but they didn't get democracy. Democracy took much longer. So just to fight, shall we say, authoritarianism, dictatorship, slavery, or slave mode of production, whatever, doesn't mean that you're being democratic. Now, the second question is about philosophy. Now, the thing really is this, that I think philosophy is a wonderful thing, provided you use it like mathematics within limits. In other words, philosophy is a source of great inspiration. I mentioned to you Fichte and dialectics. That inspired Marx, it inspired Hegel, inspired so many other people, but that doesn't mean that when you're talking about falling rate of profit, you'll say that because Fichte said there is dialectics, therefore it is right. You can't do that. Now, the other thing is, Sartre said, hell is other people. Okay? And what is the data for that? Nothing. Emmanuel Levinas said, ethics is other people. Now, what do I choose? Hell is other people or ethics is other people? I choose what suits my predilections. So it depends upon my propensities towards a certain point of view that you'll go for a certain kind of philosophical position. Sometimes these philosophical positions are very useful. It inspires you. How does Sankhya inspire me? I was looking at nation-state formation for a long time, and I found that most of the work of nation-state formation was about how a nation-state becomes a nation-state. So there were sort of set stages. There was this yellow brick road to being a nation-state. But there's no yellow brick road. Even in Europe, different nation states became nation states following their own path. In India, in South Asia, everywhere. And then I realized, because Sankhya had said that don't ask for the cause of a phenomenon, ask what is the effect of a phenomenon. So then I asked myself, what is the effect of a nation state? What does a nation state do when it becomes a nation state? And then it became so easy. But I can't say because Sankhya said, therefore it's true. And that may be inspiring me, but that's about it. Now, Zarathustra, Nietzsche said, live life dangerously. That's fine. But what is the empirical backup to it? In the genealogy of morals, he distinguished three kinds of morals. What is the empirical backup to it? Zarathustra is very inspiring. Have you heard this wonderful musical composition by Robert Strauss? It is called Thus Spake Zarathustra. You should hear it because that was the musical theme for Space Odyssey. It is also the musical theme every time Elvis Presley should come on stage. But it is called Thus Spake Zarathustra. So Zarathustra can inspire a lot of things. Do you see? So philosophy is a good storehouse of inspiration. It's a bad storehouse for quotations.
I think there is going to be many more questions and you will have an opportunity to come back. I'm just going to wind up this session by saying a couple of things. The first thing that comes to mind really is, and I find striking in his framework, Professor Gupta's statements today, is that sometimes we assume that the meaning of categories which we have received for a long time are good. It's in my... very often we assume or we've received meanings and relationship between categories and concepts through certain traditions, and we think that that's a good tool to start our work. And often it is the case. But eventually, as your work progresses, you begin to realize that maybe you need to innovate with those categories and think and imbue them with new meaning. And I think what Professor Gupta has done today is to suggest that it is time perhaps that we revisit some basic categories like that of society, of modernity, democracy, fraternity, whatever have you, imbue them with new meanings. Because if you don't, and if you just look for their empirical content, then you are not going to be able to make a fresh start into thinking or having another way of looking at the world which you are inhabiting, which is posing new issues, new challenges, new problems. Because I have found what was very striking is he began by saying that there was no society earlier. Society only came into existence with modernity. It's a relatively recent phenomena. Not only will you say, if I looked at my history of political thought or social theory, which he quoted also subsequently, hunters, gatherers, and so on and so forth, we are thinking of groups of people who had a social existence. But he wants us to think, and that's the point I think we need to carry, that often we are looking and reducing categories to their empirical content, but when you want to look at your present predicament, often you need to rethink and reimagine the relationship between categories, and the moment you do that, the meaning of the categories will change. So I take it to imply that it's not as if Aristotle said way back, human beings are social animals. Okay, you live together, you seek out, or other people said, no, under certain conditions you seek each other out, but you don't always, and I have Hobbes and Rousseau and so on and so forth in mind. So that's not the issue in terms of this is what people did, and therefore this is the meaning. I think that's the big takeaway. You think in terms of your present predicament, what the empirical world throws before you, the differences and distinctions you want to make, the ways in which you want to address it, and then imbue the relationship of these look at the relationship between categories differently, and it will also give a different meaning to those categories. Several things to take away, particularly in relationship, I think, to democracy. You raised this issue in terms of, we won't get into Judicial Club because many people would say that liberalism was at one point very mindful of what are the limits, because beyond that you are free. There are very specific limits which you should observe. But the idea about democracy telling you what not to do, I think, is very significant. I would only ask him to address subsequently a couple of other questions. Is it also telling us or asking us, giving us a boundary about how things should be done? Is it only the what question, or also the how question, which defines, so that what exactly you do is also perhaps relatively more accommodating, provided you do them in a certain sort of way. So the how question is very, very significant, and asks us to come back to it over and over again. Marshall's theory, I think, is a wonderful starting point, and you've made you've pegged your understanding of citizenship there. But the interesting thing, because you also threw in the word dialectics in between, citizenship, I'm not sure when I can say it is in full flow, because it's also work in progress. You may think in terms of there being basic equality, but then we will have to define further what is that element which we are calling basic. Because every time we think we have reached a threshold level of citizenship being realized or actualized in a given society, and that's the dialectic, something new comes up. And it pushes against the idea and say, you promised equal citizenship, but it isn't so. It isn't equality. So dialectics continues to work in that sort of way. So I thought there is something there, and yet it is not enough. And maybe either we'll have to, think in terms of what is that which holds it together. You also mentioned, I think this is also a very important point for everybody to think about a very fragile value consensus which marks modern society. It's fragile because it's always being pushed and nudged, and it is being challenged all the time. Does this where the idea of an mechanical versus organic solidarity actually comes in, that previous forms of coexistence would break down when there were challenges of this kind, and this isn't. So maybe you want to say something more or something different about it, and I think those are ideas which we will ask you to dwell on as we move to the next session.
You know how it is. You always regret that you've missed out the best part of your life. Well, Ajay, I'm very happy that you picked up these two essays of mine, because I'm very fond of them. But sometimes you develop a certain attachment, and I'm very fond of both these essays. In fact, the second one, Routine Repression, also got the Krishna Bharadwaj, what's the other person, the peasant leader? Anyway, forget it. So, right. Now you mentioned Rob.
Krishna Bharadwaj award, what is it?
Hey, Krishna Bharadwaj, who's the other peasant writer?
नहीं आगे चलो.
Is it, but क्या award information क्या है?
I'll tell you later on. So now you mentioned Robert Bella, and I want to bring this point again because you touched upon an issue that I talked about, which is that nation state and democracy are not the same thing, and very often we use nation state as a kind of a shoulder on which we fire our weapons and imagine they're democratic. Now, what we tend to do, like Robert Bella, for example, is that you talk about things that bring people together on a cultural dimension, which includes, by the way, popular renditions of the Bible and so forth. Now, the Bible, like any other scripture, which is what I wanted to say in the first paper you quoted, any other scripture speaks in different languages, many languages. So the same Bible will also tell you that the evil is Satan and armies of Satan are right there, and it is quite a good thing for you to kill them. So you can sing the hymns in praise of peace in Bethlehem and bomb Bethlehem at the same time, which actually happened 2 years ago. The White House, they were singing Peace Be in Bethlehem, that famous hymn, and they were bombing Bethlehem. In Bethlehem, there was no Christmas, by the way. And they all saw it as a righteous act because there are armies of Satan and armies of God. And in Christianity and Judaism and the Abrahamic religions, the good and the evil are equal in strength. So Satan is as powerful as God is. Satan is also an angel. In fact, a very beautiful angel. And Satan tempts people all the time. So the armies of God are constantly, fighting the armies of Satan. It's an equal war. And no one is really winning. Which is why Jesus' point all the time was that you have to fight Satan because Satan is promising the kingdom of earth. You have to fight that. So what Robert Bella and others do is a very simplified notion, the point that I had mentioned in the article you talked about the subaltern. Here Robert Bella is using the same principle to talk about the non-subaltern. Yeah. That they too are subject to a unified idea of culture, which is totally incorrect. Because if you look at the biblical renditions of in American right, as you know, Noam Chomsky has also recently pointed out that American Zionism began with Christian Zionism. So if you look at Christianity in America, there's so many different voices in Christianity. For example, Jesus Christ said that turn the other cheek. Nobody in American biblical tradition will ever say that. Because if you have hurt me, I'm going to hurt you 10 times more. So that is the way they look at it, because you are the army of Satan and we have to fight you. So what surprised me a lot during those years was that there were such authentic renditions of Peace Be in Bethlehem, little town of Bethlehem, at the same time bombing that part of the world, and they saw no contradiction at all. So it was not as if there were a whole bunch of hypocrites. They actually were religious people. And they found no contradiction in killing the armies of Satan who are sitting over there. So the idea that Robert Bella has, which is the civil religion idea, which I had to encounter very often when I was in the States from various people who said that you in India lack a civil religion. I said, no, we don't lack a civil religion. But what we are doing in India is something that you haven't done. We're trying to combat our civil religion. And you are accepting it very cheerfully, saying, look at this, we have our holidays, we have biblical references, in God we trust, and things like that, which in India till very recently, we consciously attacked it. So the idea of the normative that you mentioned, I think is very significant, because the normative that we are now positing or were positing was that of citizenship, against that of civil religion. Because civil religion, in my view, fits in very well with nationalism, but doesn't fit in well with citizenship. That is my criticism of Bella, and which is why I think that the point that Bella was making seems very attractive from a cultural point of view, but as you said, and as I'm saying also together, that what was subalterns suffered because they made a cultural stereotype of the downtrodden, we are making a cultural stereotype of the well-to-do. That Bella's is also a cultural stereotype, because Christianity has so many voices. Mahatma Gandhi had a certain very favorite Christian hymn, and when Martin Luther King asked him, "What do you want me to sing?" He said, "How do you know that?" He said, "I know the Christian hymns better than you," which is why so many Hindus think I'm a closet Christian. So being a Christian has certain values, but here is biblical, and that is the problem, because Bible does not speak in one language. Arthashastra, Manusmriti. We talk about the Manusmriti and say all kinds of things about how Manu undermined women. But in the same Manusmriti, there are passages which say women are to be respected. Women are very close to Guru, especially women who are older than you in the family, which basically means that scripture is not a unified scripture. There are so many voices in the one scripture, probably written by several people over centuries, and it's called Manusmriti. Arthashastra talks about cleanliness, which goes against the idea of Brahmins being separate. Arthashastra say everybody has to be clean, and those who are not clean, regardless of caste, will be punished. It couldn't be written by one person. At least there are different voices being spoken. I can mention that in probably everything, except for Maha Upanishad and the Esha Upanishad, which very clearly talks about something about Brahma is in everybody. All the other, including Brihadaranyaka, Chandi Yoga Upanishad, you will find that there's a difference between me and you. Constantly. The great debate that Yagyavalkya Smriti had, again that same question comes up, that we are not the same, you and I are different, and yet the tension is on. So when you look at biblical tradition, scriptural tradition, I would argue that there's so many versions of it, and what Bella was doing was just the obverse, not opposite, obverse of what Ranjit Guha did. That is the way I look at it. So the pan-Hindu idea is not one which we should really subscribe to, which is why, again, Tagore was against nationalism. Tagore attacked Gandhi.
What explains why does it work? As you said,
it works because it's easy. It's because it's easy. Nationalism is very easy. It's very easy to be nationalistic.
Basal point.
Yeah, it's very big because it's so easy to say. Nationalism means us against them. There's the enemy. Citizenship means inclusivity. So there are two different principles at work. Now, when you come to modernity, Elias's notion of, which you mentioned, Norbert Elias. The Elias's notion is very interesting because he is another kind of, shall we say, not elitist, but populist thinker, in the sense that Elias believes that repression or suppression is an indication of civilization. The more you suppress, especially bodily functions,
Right.
the more you are civilized. So civilization is equal to suppression, which comes from bodily waste, which comes from even the way you eat. If you eat and if you lunge for your food because you're hungry, it shows you're not civilized. You have to eat in a certain way. The fork was introduced from Venice, and the fork was a difficult issue because many people didn't know how to eat with a fork. But fork gradually gained prominence because it made it difficult to eat. So the more difficult it gets, the more civilized you are. So repression was a form of civilization, which Norbert Elias talked about. And then the other side of it was that maybe countries like ours are not civilized because we repress differently, which he didn't understand. He understood repression in his society, but in our society too, you can't eat with the left hand. You must eat with the right hand. So there are many rules of what can be done in terms of eating, which are the rules of snobbery, by the way. So what can be done. Now, if you look at the subject of sociology, the Indian caste system, the Indian village, they have meaning today only because of democracy. They had no meaning earlier. In fact, Indian village studies began after independence. Indian village studies was not there. Most so-called sociological studies in those days was about the fact that we had a glorious tradition. We also had big, thick books. We were also cultured, civilized people. Why? Because the British said that you guys are savages. So our point was to show that we have this book and that book, and have you read that book? Have you read that chapter? That was the emphasis that the early thinkers had. But you will find that only after independence, village studies and caste studies, the way we know it to be, happen, because all village studies are basically democratic studies. Why is this the situation in the village? Why is there this payment in kind? Why are certain people not allowed to wear certain kind of clothes? Why is the turban restricted only to some and not others? Why can't some caste twirl their mustaches? What is the matter? These questions arose because you were democratic now. You ask these questions. As I said earlier, that what social science does is the gap between what promise democracy has given and what it has achieved. Is this gap that social science is working on, and that is why you never had friendship in tradition. You only had kinship. You never had friendship. Today you're getting friendship, because friendship is choice. Salman Rushdie said, a good cosmopolitan experience is when you can choose your son-in-law. And that is very difficult, because you cannot choose your son-in-law I can't choose who my son-in-law will be if my girl is going to go around and meet boys in the college, in the bus stop, in the market. That's a big problem. So friendship, you'll find for a long time there were no friendships. I went to my cousin's home for tea. Now when I go to a village in East UP, forget West UP, in East UP, I find friendships galore. I go to a tea stall in East UP, there are people from different castes who are friends. I find migrants in Bombay who have come to Bombay because a friend has invited them, not a caste member. Earlier, remember the story that urbanization was told, this sociologist from Ahmedabad. It was about how kinship kinship ties brought people from villages to city. But today you will find at least 1/3 are friendship. So friendships is a very new thing, and friendships happen only with modernity because you have the choice. And in kinship, you don't have the choice. Okay for now.
We've run, thank you very much. We've run straight out of time. No, I don't need to take it. No, it doesn't matter. We run out of time. I'm not sure we can take any questions at all unless they are very, very pressing and urgent, because we have to move to the next session. I'm only going to say a couple of things. No, there is no time. 4:45 is when they wanted to start the next session.
Break for 15 minutes. We don't have anything in between. So if there are questions, we can take it.
Okay. So we have now permission. Any questions? Any urgent questions? Yeah. No. She has a question. Please.
But we comment on Jeff's work, Jeffrey election.
Choro na. Please.
So, I read your text on everyday resistance and routine repression. So, where I wanted to understand and wanted to travel the concept of the utter shambles of policies that used by the kind of outcome that used by this court, like the outcome of everyday resistance, the small x. So, I wanted to travel this concept to the urban empirical realities in the slum areas, where the small acts like the quiet encroachments and the theft of electricity, and these acts are very visible enough to make the changes in their everyday life, but invisible enough to make reform in their area inhabited. So I wanted to understand that how this phenomena, where over the time we see this slum, it's a long-standing slum like that is built up on the small acts, and over the time they have now negotiating power with the state. That is now there is an exchange between the words, and now they wanted to have some policies. In the context of Delhi, we have this policy like Jahan Jhuggi Wahan Makan and Modi ki guarantee. So somewhere it seems kind of a resemble with the idea of the utter shambles of policies.
Utter shambles of policies.
Utter shambles of policies. Or how do you see this phenomena? How do you interpret that phenomena that I want to know?
And Chatterjee makes a similar point in
What do you mean about growth of slums?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Quick 1-2 minute response.
Well, this is one question on which I have no answer, direct answer. I spent a fair amount of time in Dharavi slum in my days in Bombay, earlier days, and all I can say is this, that unlike what Foucault said, the prison, for example. I found that Darul Islam, the underclass, had their own counterculture. They had their own counterculture, kind of, fighting against what was imposed upon them. So it's not as if they were prisoners under a panopticon. They were fighting back. Not fighting back, they were just living back. I won't even say fighting back. The very existence itself was in many ways a front on what was being imposed upon them. And as a result, that became routine and normal over a period of time. Now the question is, which is a different one, by the way. That is, it is easier for me to let a slum grow in the vicinity as long as it doesn't bother middle class neighborhoods. If they begin to be worried only when it bothers middle class neighborhoods. If you look at the map of Delhi, and fortunately I have it with me, you will find that most of the slum resettlement colonies are way away from what we think Delhi to be. So what we're doing is we're pushing them away from Delhi and keeping them on the margins, and on an average, they need over an hour to get to work, from wherever they are. So, and I would say that what they're actually doing is that they're hiding the fact that they can't actually help them. Unable to help them, this kind of fobbing them off by saying, here you are, you have a home. There's slum resettlement in Gurgaon, there are many of them. There are 3 slum resettlements I know of, which are 6 stories high, not a single resident. Not a single resident has gone in there because it is impossible to live there. It's a small little room, no balcony, nothing. And they don't want to leave their old slum to go and live there. So slum resettlement is something which is of a different order altogether. And I don't think that is a fulfillment of citizenship at all.
No, but the larger point is Chatterjee makes a similar point in political society where he says these routine violations over a period of time delegitimize property relations, right property.
It doesn't delegitimize. What happens really is, I want to correct Chatterjee, if that's what he says, I'm surprised, because these people, then what happens is about 78 or 80%, I'm not sure, of slum dwellers own property. The property is in their name. In Dharavi slum, for example, almost everybody owns that piece of land. So when they leverage that for other things, now what Dharavi they're doing, they're leveraging that to get. So earlier we thought these slum dwellers are nothing. No, they own. They have ownership rights, which is what it's in their hands now. In fact, they even have pieces of paper which confirm it. Those pieces of paper are not your piece of paper. The piece of paper you have to be a member of defense colony or whatever, Sarvodaya enclave, that's different from their piece of paper, but they have a piece of paper which is marketable. Not marketable, what's the word for it? Which can be economically used, monetized. That can be monetized. So he is not quite correct in that sense, because they are not undermining property, they're actually overvaluing property. So even these people now have property, so that becomes an overvaluation of the whole idea of property rights.
Yeah. Just start the question till the mic reaches you. We won't have time.
Yes, Dipankar sir argued that democracy allows innovation, and you have also argued in your book, The Culture and the Nation State, that spaces are not neutral and always subject to change. So, what would you regard to new innovations by the UPCM, is it democratic innovation to control the people, or regression by crushing the democratic essence by targeting who rises or questions the system by practicing the right to protest and demonstrations? And as you have also argued, democracy is never complete. Is it always in progress, or what the UPCM is doing? It is a regression of the democracy.
What doing?
UPCM.
UPCM. I thought UPSC.
UPCM.
By the time
I live in Uttarakhand, so I have no idea what UPCM is doing. In fact, I have no idea what Uttarakhand CM is doing either.
Any other questions before we give him the last word? Supriya?
Can I ask something to Ajay sir? Is it possible?
I will not give him time to answer, but you can ask.
Yes, let him ask a question.
You can ask.
So, while questioning the 2 papers, one of the things that you said, reflecting back on the last 10 years of contemporary politics, was that there has been a generalized cultural freedom which cannot be reduced to particularistic identity. And then you said this goes against the materialist kind of reading that Brother Gupta is doing. So I'm just asking, are even this generalized cultural idiom, is it structured in a big economic structure wherein this cannot transcend? This generalized cultural idiom is also within a larger economic structure which cannot transcend that. So it is the larger economic structure of the material reality which then structures the generalized cultural idiom. Is it that, or can it transcend that also?
I think this is now time for me to intervene. And do you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to say that fieldwork is a political act. So I can ask you questions, you can't ask me.
Yes.
So it's a political act. What happened was, when I was in Britain once, this person was asking me questions about my family. So I said, well, I'm going to ask you a question about your family, and our friendship just disappeared.
I think this discussion could continue, but I think, Supriya, you raised a question which allows me to come in to say that now we have actually two kinds of generalities. One which you presented as a mode of question, and the other which you attacked, which you thought is thinking in terms of people or whatever, the subaltern, as having a kind of mentality, so therefore having one kind of outlook and so on and so forth. And now saying, and this is a common thing, it's not only that this is relevant vis-a-vis the subalterns, this is a very current argument where people are seen to be those who have some ethnic religious identity, so they have this kind of vulnerability, and that is what they are attached to, and this argument keeps running even now. And I think what you are posing against it is an equally overgeneralized picture, which is saying something like this, that they have all been, that people or most of us or whatever, I don't know, have been, are now part of a generalized, what he calls a cultural idiom. And I think what is missed in both these kinds of things is something like this, that I think if you look at the history of Indian, journey of Indian democracy, and even its starting point, its moment of inception, never was religion bracketed out. So it's not a new phenomenon. The whole idea that we thought in terms of respect to everybody, or sarva dharma sambhava, is because we assume that religion is important, therefore respect is owed to everybody because this is an important aspect of who they are. So I don't think that cultural idiom was necessarily missing. The issue is what kind of cultural idiom. That's the important thing. And therefore there is a replacement. Even when Bella is talking or we are talking about it, we are thinking in terms of construction of that idiom. It's not naturally given. So let's not assume either that we have missed out, and I think this is an argument I just came across because of what he sent me in the morning, that we have missed out on this element, that we did not, talked about democracy, but we didn't talk about religion. No, we were very aware that that people have identities, and religion could be an aspect of it, and often is, and it is also an aspect which some of them may value in some form or the other, very openly, very loosely, and so on and so forth. So I think that extreme is also not true, and so is this. The point really is that at this moment, whether here or elsewhere in the world, we need to think in terms of people having multiple identities. Certainly, the issue of people who felt that they are, even after 70 years, still on the margins or feeling excluded, want a share of something that they can be a part of, which is a larger imagination or power or opportunity or resource. So it is this intersectionality that we have to think in terms of multiple identities, one of which is that you could also have an appeal to a shared aspect within that cultural identity. Not necessarily all of it, but some of it. And since Rawls has come up so frequently, I'm over the time limit, I can't but say this, that I have never seen Rawls as a person who favors intersubjectivity. For him, individuals are basically rational people who choose their self-interest. Therefore, the veil of ignorance is so important. Without the veil of ignorance, I will never see myself or say, what if I am at the place of the most vulnerable person? And how will I then want, what kind of system will I want? The veil of ignorance is needed because I cannot be intersubjective. I am basically self-interested. If I knew I'm in a privileged position, why will I say that it is necessary to think from the vantage point of the least advantage? No. It's just the possibility that I could be there that makes it necessary for me to think along those kinds of positions. So I think there is so much more that one could talk about. Social positions, I don't know. I think issue is not that social positions are no longer important or that material conditions are not. The two are in interaction with each other. It's sometimes material necessities that actually privilege, that allow you to use a cultural idiom and mobilize the cultural idiom to effect certain kind of changes. So I think the two cannot be seen as two discrete realities which are being presented to us as discrete reality. That is historical materialism or whatever else you want to call it, or class politics or whatever. But there are economic compulsions and positions, but there is also this other element that you need to see how do you really, you have other kinds of identities, how do the two come together, how do you use one in association with the other, sometimes to leverage your interest and sometimes leverage power and sometimes just to feel a part of a larger whole. So since JNU Academic brings us here as part of the larger whole, so thank you very much to them for organizing this and the second section. My thanks to Ajay, Ratheesh and Professor Gupta and to all of you. And with that, let's conclude this session and invite for the next session.
I think Mekhla had three questions. I think I cannot answer one. I'll try to answer the other two. Her question was from public. The basic question was, in which case, what is the meaning of the public? Where does the public come from? I tried to explain this earlier, but this idea of what cannot be done, in my understanding, is actually encapsulates the public. The public is what you cannot do. So let us say you're going to a park. The park is public because in that park you can play frisbee, you can take your dog for a walk, but there are certain things you cannot do, which is what makes it a public space. I go back to Hegel again, which is, I think this is important, because Hegel said that he admired Roman law, by the way, but he said there's one aspect of Roman law which is dreadful, and that is that a father has complete control over his children and his wife, husband. His argument was that a husband-wife relationship is a relationship of contract, not of sex. Very often people say that, that's sexual relations. So sexual relations is very, very minor part of it. You can have sexual relations wherever. For husband-wife relationship is primarily a contractual relationship between equals, point one. And the children are citizens. They're short, but they're still citizens. And because they're citizens, therefore, your home is not your castle. So very often people say, my home is my castle. That was a point made by a medieval scholar, a judge in fact, who said, my home is my castle. But your home is not your castle because whatever happens inside your home is a matter which the public interrogates. How you treat your children, how you treat your wife, whatever goes on, is a public matter. Which is why I said that a public is really a box of things that cannot be done, and that resides in the state. Tony Judd, for example, Tony Judd's last meeting that he held before he passed, I was present in that. And we talked about exactly this point, about citizenship, and exactly this thing about Hegel. And it was very interesting. Tony Judd by that time was very sick. But it was interesting how Tony Judd responded to it. And he said that if he only knew India better, his understanding of society would be richer. And that is simply this, that India is really a laboratory. It has everything here. So whatever you want to study, whichever theoretical aspect you want to study, India is the ground. Which is why the book I wrote, QED, I wrote India Tests Social Theory. Now, how to cultivate citizenship? That is a question that Mekhla raised. My answer to her in keeping with what I've said so far, that you cultivate citizenship by making sure how not to cultivate citizenship. You don't tell citizens what to do, tell them what you cannot do. And the remainder is cultivating citizenship. You don't go forward and say, do this, but you make sure that certain things are not done. You cannot, for example, in your heart, you might believe that a Brahmin is great because you are a Brahmin, but you cannot express it in public life. That's not possible. It's not allowed. You might believe that blacks are inferior, but you cannot express it in any form in public life.
Correctness is a form of
Political correct, not just in word, but you cannot do it because that is the way in which you support citizenship, not by what you do, but what you cannot do. The remainder helps citizenship in what you cannot do. The state-agent power relationship is interesting because, after I took early retirement from JNU in 2009 or 8, I forget, many years ago. And then I was reading around, you might say intellectual jaywalking, and I came to the conclusion, reading around, that some of the biggest, most impressive developments in democracy didn't happen because of people pressure, but because of certain elite groups who thought differently. And therefore there was no sociology of democracy. It either happens or it doesn't happen. It's a matter of luck. So I was talking about this to a friend of mine, and he said, and I told him that I wish I was born 100 years ago, then I would have met people who made this change. For example, Benjamin Disraeli was a crusty conservative, but he was a man who thought in terms of housing for the poor. On the basis of it, Engels wrote that working class essay. Housing for the poor, which included ventilation, is what actually brought down the rate of TB. TB rates went down not because of medicine, but because of an engineering principle. And that was what Benjamin Disraeli. Robert Peel was the richest landlord in England, and he thought of the Corn Law, which was against his interests. So there were many such cases. David Lloyd George, again. Winston Churchill, before he became a rotten fellow, Winston Churchill was one of the leaders of the social insurance movement. So my question was, where have these people gone? Where are they now? And state agents, you see. So this friend of mine who was Spanish, who said that it's happening today in the Basque country in Spain. You go there, you'll find these state agents acting for democracy. So my wife and I went to Bilbao for 6 months, and we stayed there. We met these people. It was the most amazing story. They had given up their jobs after Franco died. Democracy came, and they made sure that when there was 40% unemployment in Basque Spain, they said, we're going to have universal health, universal education, and unemployment insurance. 40% unemployment. And you know what? Basque Spain didn't sink. Basque Spain prospered. It prospered to such an extent that Basque Spain today is number 2 only to Germany in terms of Human Development Index. Number 1 in terms of European Innovation Index, which is by the EU. So the state-agent relationship is again something which is very chancy. You either get it or you don't. Most people suffer because they don't. But it is so interesting to know that a democracy can also do it. People say that, you need a dictatorship for these things to happen. You have China dictatorship, Singapore dictatorship. Now I have a very good example from Basque Spain where it is totally democracy that made this change. The Nevrion River in Basque Spain was the dirtiest river you can imagine. It is so clean now you can see the fish swimming inside. So that is my argument, that you cannot decide once and for all how state agents will interact with ordinary people, because generally speaking, state agents are professional politicians. And a professional politician is looking for their own advantage. It's like somebody who works for Larsen & Toubro, and then Anderson Cooper says, we'll give you more money, so they move. Somebody with the Congress, they can give you more money, they go to BJP. They're professionals. So these are professionals. But if you have citizens who are leaders, I call them elite of calling. Something else can happen, but you can't predict that in advance. About your questions, first of all, there's one point I want to clarify, is that Michael Moffat is not my friend. I mean, we don't think alike, because Michael Moffat is actually Dumontian. Michael Moffat is really a Dumontian. He says that Indian society is unique because Indian society is the only society where the downtrodden participate in their own subjugation. That is, if you say I'm untouchable, I said, yes, indeed I'm untouchable. My blood is bad, my bones are bad, my skin is bad, everything is bad, I deserve to be untouchable. So he says in India, this subordinate community participate in their own subjugation. I found that very, very offensive, because when I investigated what the subordinate communities talk about, they don't accept it at all. Not one. In fact, I have probably over 1,000 origin tales, many collected from Enthoven and Risley, many collected by me after I was made aware of this. And I said to myself, why didn't my teachers in MA ever talk about any other legend but the Purusha Shukta legend? That was the only legend they talked about. From the Brahmin comes so from the head comes the Brahmin, etc., which is also in the Chanda Yoga Upanishad. Why didn't they tell us that there's so many origin tales, and each origin tale is as good as, or as bad as ridiculous as, or as glorious as the Purusha Shukta? Why didn't they talk about that? And when I tell them that this is the origin tale of the Teli caste, why do people smile? Why don't they smile when I say this is the origin tale of the Brahmins? It's equally ridiculous, equally glorious, equally fantastic. But no, if Purusha Shukta, because it's in the appendix of Rig Veda, that's why it is okay. And these are oral traditions, therefore they're not okay. So Michael Moffat's point of view is something which I really oppose, because he says that is what makes Indians, he says, unique. Now, when I write about caste, especially discrete caste, my point was this, that Indians are normal people. They're not unique people. I want to normalize Indians. Like every other community, there's nowhere in the world a person would say, I'm intrinsically bad. They might say, I've lost a war. They might say, I'm poor. They might say, I'm not even that good looking. But they will not say, I'm intrinsically, essentially bad. Nobody says it. But Michael Moffat says, Indians say it, Hindus say it, and I want to show Hindus are also normal people. They don't say it. They also say that I'm better than you, like everybody. You're from Maharashtra. I spent many years in Maharashtra, and you know that amongst the Marathas, there are 93 clans. You know the 93 clans? You ask any Maratha, what is the ordering of the 93 clans? There's a my clan and 92 others. You know? So in every case, it's me and then the rest. This is a normal human thing, and Hindus are the same. They're equally normal. They say, I am the best, everybody else is not as good. And this story, I'll just tell you this very quickly. I believed in Dumontian understanding of caste, and therefore, like many other leftists, at that time I thought I should tell the underclass that, you know, this is a lie what the Brahmins are saying. So that was my point of view. I was in Surat, that was my first job in Surat. And there this woman was working for me because you know how it is, someone must boil your water and stuff. So one day she was introduced to me as a Dubla. Dubla is a low caste community. And we got talking, we became very friendly. And you know, so one day she tells me, I'm not a Dubla, I'm actually a Rajput Rathore. So I said, you're crazy. I mean, everybody knows you're a Dubla. She said, no. This area where we're living in now belonged to my ancestor. Till my ancestor, look at the words, adopted a low caste person who stabbed him in the back and took over the throne. But a time will come when you see that we'll reclaim our position. So I thought she was completely bananas. But when I went to her village and met her grandchildren, her son-in-law, they all said the same story. It's not just a story of somebody who wants to escape. This is a story of the community. Then I realized why they couldn't state it. They couldn't state it because if they said it openly, they'd be beaten. How dare you say this? You know, how dare you claim to be of a certain kind? You will also find the census of India, 1931 census, there are more people claiming Kshatriya status than Brahmin status. In the 1881 census, there are more people claiming Brahmin status, not Kshatriya status. Because by 1931, in the villages, there was some change. And the villagers, lower undercaste people, so-called low-caste people, I use the term so-called everywhere. James Maynard used that term in a Harvard lecture and he didn't quote me. He says low caste. He did not use it. I use that word so-called low caste. Nobody is low caste. Everybody says I'm upper caste. So you say low caste, you must always use the prefix so-called low caste. The so-called low caste, everywhere they say that I'm as good as you, even better. You say you're from the head of Brahma. Do you know about me? I'm from the eyes of Brahma. The eyes are even better than the head. It's purer than the head. So these are the kinds of controversies you have. And why not? That's quite common. So yes, nobody is opposing caste system, caste order, caste identity. They're all opposing the caste system. Why? Because the caste system is based on power. But today, the landlord doesn't have that power. He had once upon a time. So the caste system in a village was pyramidal shape. Now that power has gone. So if you cannot be my patron, why should I take nonsense from you? So now I am able to speak of my identity. In the past, you dare not say you're a Kshatriya in a village. You can say you're a Brahmin. Brahmin is no problem. In a village, Brahmins don't count. You can say you're a Brahmin. But if you say you're a Kshatriya, then the village upper caste, the dominant caste, who claim Kshatriya status, will be very upset. So nobody said Kshatriya. But from 1931, when the British came and the backward class movement started, they were emboldened to say that we are Kshatriyas. The Bhat community in Gujarat, they always said that we are Kshatriyas because they used to serve the princes of Saurashtra. Then they found that the real power lay with the Banyas. Now they call themselves Banyas. So how, you know how it is? This is how things change. So I would say that in the caste order, we should now move away from system to structure and identity. Identity is what very important, and you cannot understand caste politics without identity today. Caste politics was always in India. That is how the Gujarat Pratihara kingdom came up. That is how the Jats came up, the Rajputs came up, everywhere. They came up with a caste war. And you know, the poet said, what's her name? Gray, elegy written in the country called Thomas Gray. He said, wade through slaughter to a throne. So all these people waded through slaughter to a throne. But today, caste politics is an everyday matter. And that is why we talk about it in democratic terms. In the past, it happened once in 300 years. When it happened, people died. Well, thank you.
Being a postmodernist,
against postmodernism. So I'm really, I should sit down with him and ask him why he thought so. And I always felt that Clifford Geertz was a culturalist, that he gave a culturological explanation to most things. In fact, Clifford Geertz's understanding of culture was that it is a hum. It is like a musical score. You know, it is something which is given, almost like a musical score, yes. And you play according to the rules. But for me, culture is odds and ends. All kinds of things brought together, and you can pick one element against another element. There's no consistency in culture. Culture is full of, you know, discordant pieces. One element of culture say, you should be very punctual. And when you have Muhurat of your marriage, very punctual. Elsewhere, punctuality is not important. One place they say cleanliness is very important. Then they say it's not important. Arthashastra, as I told you earlier, cleanliness is very important, and other places not important. So culture is not something which is homogeneous. It is really a very mixed bag. It is a mixed bag that we identify with. So I identified one aspect, you with another, and then we'll fight.
But wouldn't you say that multiple hierarchies is multiple interpretations?
Multiple hierarchies is not postmodernism, because in postmodernism, the point that I think I'm making is that multiple hierarchies say that one hierarchy, which Dumont argued, Moffat, Dumont, and Indians too, Ketkar, for example, even Ghurye, the one hierarchy, that is not correct. because there are many hierarchies in work and they are clashing. Because of the clash, you have caste politics. Otherwise, where is the symbolic energy for caste politics going to come from? If I believe the hierarchy is universal, then there's no question of politics. I should accept it, right? And this multiple hierarchy is what brings about contradictions, and a contradiction that you and I can understand. So I understand your problem, you understand my problem, we don't agree and we fight. The problem with postmodernism is, if I understand you, there's something wrong.
Yeah, you can't answer.
Thank you for that note, and
Okay, thank you.
I have proven to be a bad chair because we are running out of time. Quickly, if you have, I can invite 3 questions. Yeah, please go ahead with the mic.
Thank you.
Please try to be brief and sharp.
Okay,
Yeah.
sharp and brief.
Yes.
2 sets of questions, one on caste, one on the citizen elite. So it is true, as you rightly argue, that in contrast to Dumont's perception, that the conception of caste as status enveloping power paints a Brahmanical and inaccurate picture of caste practices in India. It is true. However, how do we account for the inhuman practice of untouchability if we see caste sans ideology? So if there is no ideology attached to caste, how do we account for untouchability only in terms of power and identity? Are these practices reducible to power? How do we think about the historicity of caste without thinking it as an exceptional institution? How do we think about the historicity of the caste without thinking it as an exceptional institution in the context of untouchability? That's what.
Take the second question. Come after and tell him the second question. So everybody can answer. Just take one minute.
No, sir.
In the interest of everybody starts.
Thank you, sir, for such a wonderful discussion. I was thinking about the 3 categories you have introduced. One is society, other is democracy, and you said that it is on the basis of the value of citizenship. And you said all these 3 categories always in progress. So I was just thinking about the direction of progress and what force, if you envision some force, what would be that force? And the other thing is, when you talk about society, and you are saying that society is the modern thing. So do you envision society in the sense, emotion, say religion, like going beyond modernity? Thank you.
Yeah, just one last question, then we'll see.
Sir, basically, I come from North Bihar. Sir, what I have, the topic is regarding the villages. So the one thing I have observed that from last 4 decades, actually not from this decades, the early 90s, the other backward class people they started using surnames of upper castes. It started as when I talked to my father. So it started around early 90s, and still you will find in many villages the other backward class people. There are different sub-caste category. They started using their upper caste names.
All right.
So
Thank you.
and at the same time, I have felt when I talked to some upper caste guys, so they are saying they have kind of they are saying why they use our service.
Yeah, got your point. Yeah, just.
So my question is, what is your take on this?
Yeah, last
Sir,
question.
I have very short questions. The first time I heard your statement that in India the lower caste, so-called lower caste, has accepted their subjugation. First time.
No. I'm the opposite. I'm saying.
He's saying the opposite. They don't accept.
I'm saying that Michael Moffat is saying it. I'm not saying it. I oppose. Michael Moffat said lower caste not accept, they also participate in the subjugation.
But sir, how is we can see the movement led by, for example, Periyar?
No. I'm saying the opposite.
I'm saying that that was one statement. I'm just
which shows that what Periyar and others have done only shows that Michael Moffat is wrong. That's all.
You can actually extend to answer to other questions.
Yeah.
Can I ask the last question?
We're well over time now.
Yeah. Well, you see, this pollution thing, what is so specific about Indian caste is I don't think it is that Indians are abnormal people. I think the Indian normal people, what is about caste which makes it different is the fine gradation of differences. What somebody said, the obsession with minor difference. But you see, the idea of pollution was there in the Greek society, it was there in Egyptian society. Now, I don't know why over time that went away there. Probably because the Iron Age came there with conquest. I'm guessing here. The Iron Age in our country came under the leadership of the empire. So when the Iron Age came to Greece and to Egypt, it destroyed everything. It destroyed the Bronze Age. Whereas here, the Bronze Age sponsored the Iron Age. Because Iron Age came here 500 years after Iran, 800 years after Greece. So maybe that is the reason why. But pollution has been there. In Greece, for example, pollution was, the Temple of Delphi, all that, a lot of pollution ideas are in Egypt again. So that is a question which is a big if. How did it happen? That we don't know. The direction of progress, work in progress, right? Now, direction of progress is very interesting because it can be backward, it can be regressive also. And both can happen. You can go forward and backward. And if you go backward, it's very difficult to go forward again. Some of the problems that we see in India today actually began with the emergency. Most of the terrible acts, even in the Constitution, our Constitution is not very perfect. Our Constitution allowed for preventive detention. And whatever were the minor flaws in our Constitution, over the years have become major flaws. They made it worse and worse. So I think this progress is something we must want, because normally, because of what she said, normally state actors are professionals. They want to secrete conditions for their own existence. If you're not a professional state actor, you would secrete conditions for your own non-existence. Make yourself, irrelevant. Now, the backward caste, yes, not just a backward caste, even scheduled caste. They take names of their surnames of the upper castes very often. For example, why is it that many backward castes use the word Singh? Because many backward castes are in fact becoming today the accepted Kshatriya caste in most parts of India, North India. Most backward castes, for example, Yadavs, are the Kshatriyas of today. The Jats are Kshatriyas of today, and they all use the surname Singh and other surnames also. So in India, for example, you cannot tell which caste belong. For example, I am a Gupta, right? And I'm not a Banya. I come from Bengal, and Bengal Guptas are not Banyas. But over here, they think all Guptas are Banyas. So you go somewhere else, Thorat, you must be a Maratha. But all Thorats are not Marathas. So there are different kinds of, caste names that people adopt. And it is not at all unlikely that you would adopt the caste name of a caste that has power. So you want to exercise, or at least give the demonstration that you are also powerful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this, wonderful session contributed by Dr. Mekhla and Dr. Pradeep, and interesting response from Professor Gupta. And to the organizers, I'll take less than 1 minute just to wind up. It was a privilege, and also I really enjoyed being part of this entire program from 2:30 to now. It's a long stretch. And as some sort of takeaway and for future thinking, I thought of picking two problems that both these speakers raised. One is the question of cultivating citizenship, and it reminds the question that you talked about cultivating intersubjectivity in a different way. And I was thinking about being in a position of what we can call domination or being dominant. How do we find sources for questions like confession, guilt, or how do we address or redress those questions which come in the way of what you call being equal or being modern. Secondly, to Pradeep's invocation about the differences within and the kind of I would like to say it's a kind of a curiosity of caste identity, which you have responded very interestingly about names. And in fact, I have come across, I was also telling my students the other day when I was teaching research methodology and the question of ethics, when we look at identities very specific to India, especially when identities are invoked, the caste identity invoked very profoundly. And unlike identities related to gender or race, caste has this tricky thing of it can be hidden very interestingly. It can be hidden from your skin, body, texture, speech, dress, clothing, all those things. But then the other always had this puzzle of working with this curiosity. Who are you? And this I found very, it is part of our everyday context. It keeps happening, and that's what I like this invocation that you have done. How you place yourself in that hierarchy, and there is always that placement of the other below or above, and that makes it more complex. And with this note, and these are questions to be tackled not immediately, but for our ongoing thought process. And I really thank the organizers, JNU Academic, for giving me this opportunity to be part of it, and to both our speakers, Mekhla and Pradeep and Professor Gupta. I would love to continue this conversation with you at some other point. Thank you so much once again. Thanks to all of you.
Can I also say a word of thanks to all of you? In fact, I think all of you are new to JNU from my point of view. I am the first batch of JNU students, so I am almost a dinosaur. And I haven't talked to you earlier, haven't met you earlier, and I'm so flattered that you wanted to talk to me. And I'll take this to my grave. Thank you.
Over to you.